Hello everyone, today we discuss a topic that has come to maturity during this time, which will also come back multiple times on it, hopefully, regarding the deeper meaning of Schwerpunkt in general. I still have actually to make a video to explain what the actual Schwerpunkt is in the Clausewitzian theory. This is different, albeit always connected to it in a certain way, as the Clausewitzian theory is crucial even for the topic we're discussing now. I don't know which degree of synthesis and directness I will achieve in this video, because it's one of those topics that are better introduced gradually and with a degree of, let's say, also of understanding from my side. Let's say, of what I have built myself after all in these 4 years of Schwerpunkt, and what this whole thing, can have led, in fact, to some degree of forgetfulness from my side, or at least carelessness towards what eventually the audience would understand from this channel. And you know that I've been vocal multiple times on my historical view and hence worldview and kind of moral scientific idea. As in my historian playlist that many of you have always said, it's my favorite, please keep talking about this. I have expressed, as a matter of fact, and yet I think this has become kind of a leitmotif of Schwerpunkt itself. Every time I complain, in fact, about the failure of in communication and or of understanding of what the channel is concretely about, and I'm trying to be nice, not to say that it's an audience problem, which I don't mean in its globality, of course, perhaps, and I want to hope this because I don't know it factually, and not even in its prevalence in the majority, right? I have come to realize how YouTube mechanics are pretty weird, and the dynamics even more, and so how making all these videos here, also with the issues I've had having to with the algorithm, having had to re-upload some videos for my shortcomings, let's say, but still witnessing that there's been that much of the views actually do depend on the algorithm. Unfortunately, not much from on the actual on the audience sometimes, is making this whole thing quite foggier and let's say difficult to track at some point. In fact, I'm even wondering whether this channel is headed towards a growth, because I think that the algorithmic fall that we have witnessed recently due to the re-uploads in autumn, etc., may have sensibly crippled the channel. I see that there is a very few coming back. There are this doesn't depend on the audience, because the attitude has remained the same. That let's say core base of followers and viewers that watch the content habitually, daily, we can say, is always there. So I don't want to blame the audience for this, but at the same time I realize something beyond that, which is cultural, as a matter of fact, and that I have been reflecting now throughout all these years, if not way before. That is the let's say properly the possibility of reception of certain ideas, and why this doesn't happen, and why you can already know and understand that in part it will not be received, it will not be understood, it will not be accepted, as a matter of fact, because it won't be welcome in a way. And the interesting aspect of this all is that the subscribers have kept increasing, in spite of all. So there's never been a moment which subscribers have gone down, right? It's something terrifying. It is the watch length has gone down because of algorithmic reasons, but the channel keeps growing with subscribers. So it's pretty weird, and that's also a reason why we should counter the algorithm, because it's fault naturally. But coming to the point, what I have lamented also in other videos is fundamentally that the reason why a big part, again, I cannot say whether it's the majority or not, but let's say of the subscribers actually are here not because they know or they're willing to know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it or what I've already done for that matter. It's very easy to see even in here that I may have this increase in following, but that a very few people even know what I've not just, for example, the amount of stuff I made, that, let's say, if you follow me for the content, you could simply go click and look at, and instead I realized that most YouTubers are here just because they want the the new video, right? And who cares that there are others, right? It's from even 1 year ago, right? I wouldn't kind of listen to it, or maybe it's irrelevant, or who cares that it even exists. And secondly, but what I actually discussed, and it's true that again, I've made mostly history videos, so it's obvious that the majority of the users who come here mostly for a general reason that unfortunately seems to be ever more specific in the wrong direction. Let's say appreciation for that specific historical content. That is to say, I speak of that X people, let's say, and so people subscribe here because of that. And so they think most of the times that I talk history and or about this specific cultural, ethnic, or national contexts because I'm kind of making some sort of propaganda and or I don't know, I'm winking at certain kind of communitaristic or culturalistic ideas about, if not ethno-nationalistic ideas for that matter. And so the first direction fundamentally is that one, and I understand it because at least in the general let's say feed that I have received, that is overwhelmingly positive. But let's say when I start talking about openly about what I'm doing, seems in part to create some perplexity. This being quite evident to me when I made that video about Ukraine, that has comforted me because has shown, for example, first of all, an overwhelming support in front of the coast. That's why I don't want to believe that this phenomenon is a majority one. I believe that majority of my subscribers are actually overwhelmingly in tune and in line, and they share basically the same ideas and great part of the understanding of this whole thing, right? I'm actually surprised, leaving aside the Ukrainian stuff for a while, by the, in fact, that support that I receive constantly for the kind of historical content that I make. It is true, again, that still a small channel, that there is this algorithmic issue that betrays in a way the sense that people are just fed my content automatically, and that there is not maybe this awareness or conscientiousness in a way from great part of the audience. And I understand that because I see also the audience is normally it's not that young. Honestly, it's my age mostly, but it tends to be younger in general, at least. It's balanced in a way that there are much less older people, but there are, as a matter of fact. I have a substantial group from all the older age groups participating to Schwerpunkt. But the main point sometimes that I get here, as I understand from people that have kept following me for a long time too, and that keep following me in spite of, in fact, what they're saying in this regard, is that there is an enormous load of I can't define them differently from ethno-nationalists, really, right? I I think this is an appropriate idea. I could call them communitarists. I could call them even. I could even call them alt-righters. I could even call them white supremacists. I could even, but this actually goes even beyond being white, because I've met a lot of non-white people, as a matter of fact, that are somewhat suprematistic in a racial sense, in a white-oriented idea, kind of direction, which, again, I believe racism is bullshit in the first place, and it betrays fundamentally a great cultural deficit, but at the same time it doesn't, it seems it's taking a disturbing character on the pattern of some kind of other identities, because I honestly even don't believe that there are racist people in the world, right? I believe there are people who are maybe culturally racist in this sense, that are not really the way they are because their problem is race per se, but it's because of what they think that culture is about, and this is very risky. Of course, it reaches the same levels of what could be racism. That is a very specific thing in history, not the thing that today people say, you're racist just because, I don't know, you express, I don't know, a negative remark about a certain people or culture or whatever. They're talking about actual racism. That is the proto-scientific racist theory that was developed in the 19th century, and that also, by the way, came after the normality of racial discrimination throughout all history, in any culture, in any people, among any people, etc. And this great bulk of people, I don't know whether they are among my audiences, whether they are more, it's because they are more vocal, right? Or they are, because they're a minority at the end of the day. That is, when I make videos that are actually expose these things, I don't get the negative feed that I do, but I realize that whenever I do talk about these things, whereas before I don't have any negative feed, this one appears in a little but still relevant proportion, and especially it becomes vocal. This video is also a chance to discuss actually other things. This is not about my channel, actually. It's a much deeper issue that has not even to do with that specifically, but it's like when, I don't know, you look at YouTube videos or you on Twitter, Facebook posts, etc. It seems quite evident that the most the most active, I can say structurally, but let's say intensively from a moral point of view, active communities are the extremistic ones. That is to say, I don't know, the support towards Russia now seems to be incredibly, it's incredibly stronger, like in qualitatively speaking, stemming from even from the language, that there is a frustration, an aggressiveness, of violence in the language. You know that also my language is quite violent in many ways, but I try to discipline that violence to provide for an idea, for an explanation of reality, not for making this blind propaganda that I really you gotta admit doesn't exist from the other side, right? I would like to say that they are actually, I wouldn't like to say that they are mostly right-wingers, because objectively they're not just right-wingers. At least, what is right and left in here is very difficult to explain, because I don't believe that's actually the problem. I don't believe that's actually the dominating dichotomy that we're witnessing, especially if you look at what is happening with Russia, that seems to be, gathering an enormously disturbing consensus from mostly what were left-wingers, what, were, communists in Western countries in the 80s, when they were complaining about the Euro missiles, right? This kind of people that personally I, just from the cultural background they stem from, the non-existence of the cultural background, this is exactly the point that I'm making today, are just, you know that they're fundamentally disadvantaged individuals with no particular talent and or capacity for which they do what they do in terms of having this acid complaint about essentially things that they don't understand, because that's where it gets down to, right? And that they presume, or they even don't. Because you see, I do come from an extremistic experience in my life as well. Like when I was younger, it's normal that you are more extremistic. I say it without problem. It was like I was never let's say an activist. I was never really politically involved in a personal, I mean, in a public, put in this way, sense. I got to know the world, and when you get to learn about the world, especially when you're younger, it's tough, right? It's not easy. You understand the reaction, you understand the denial, you understand the discrimination, you understand the violence. I think this is part of the wall, right? I've done things that you would think were quite extremistic, actually, in interpersonal relations. I can be a very, very aggressive person for, even the right reasons, which I don't know whether you expect from me, but I think so, because you know that I'm not that that mild as a person, even though I trying to have this kind of positive face on the internet, and also because of the sake of the message that has to be calm, has to be rational, has to be equilibrated in a way, but still has to be powerful in some fashion that I need to stress. So I like these paradoxes and anecdotes when I talk the thing. But what struck me the most is two things. First of all, like one is disappointing. The other one is actually, it gives me confidence and hope, as a matter of fact, for better things to come. Because from one side, it was a person. I remember it was surely you see, every time I make a video, let's start from this. Every time I make a video, I already know more or less what people think. You would be thinking, are you psychic? Like, what the hell do you know about what other people think? Yeah, of course, I don't know that, but every time, like, I've made many videos at this point, maybe just statistically that would have a kind of value, if anything, but it's really, at this point, managing to predict it, that every time I make a video about a certain topic, I already know kind of what I'm pushing, because it's always, at the end of the day, whatever you say, you're pushing something in any circumstance, and what kind of reaction I will get, and or even if there isn't, right? Even in the silence, even in other rather subtle indirect indicators, I can understand what I'm striking on. That is what I'm annoying like, and what is that I'm saying that is more or less balanced, that may lead people to a certain direction or another. And I realized over time, of course, that I've been somewhat lenient towards ideologism, because at the end of the day, I make videos that are like, everybody is ideological, right? But let's say, of course, I mostly make history videos, so there is a narrative. There is surely some kind of ideological content in it. There is some biases, because we all have it in a way. But that I think the reason why you keep following me, as we'll see now, even in those circumstances when I find a person that just can't stand what I'm saying, is that evidently there is something there that you like. I remember, actually, before this thing of Ukraine, but I've I also follow American conservatives, and I am a conservative myself, as a matter of fact, but I'm not entirely satisfied with lots of things that are going on. In fact, most of the videos that I will make will deal with this specific topic. Maybe this is just an introduction this time, but it was a guy who told me once, I think it was last autumn, I was vocal about the fact that critical race theory and gender theory are bullshit, basically. And I remember I was struck because this guy told me, "Oh, finally something I agree on with you." And the thing that I liked about that is that I didn't ask the person, maybe he's listening right now, is what struck me, it's not that he agreed with me, because I think that's it's quite easy to agree on such things. At least statistically, there are lots of people, just half of the people, if not more, think it like you. But is what had you been following me for if you disagreed with everything up to this point, until I said that, right? That's the thing that struck me. That is to say, why do you follow me for? It's a compliment to me, because it means that things I say, in spite maybe annoying whatever the historical interpretation, and I think even in there to have understood what is the person that didn't like, from the type of user, from the language, the terminology, the approach, etc. That it may be actually one of those cases in which actually the person understands. I think most people do understand, as a matter of fact, the points that I'm making in here about reason, about morality, about science, about force, about civilization, about what is that modernity or secular thought has brought, my points about theism and atheism. There is a lot out there that I subtly, sometimes implicitly, and sometimes directly too, because I don't hide things. It's just that in this sense I try to tailor them within the narrative in a way that makes sense with the links that I have with reality. That is the thing I study, and I think that as a historian is the most important thing, that is to be wired to reality, but for every human being, right? So that, as you know, my understanding of history is an existential experience. As a matter of fact, it's not about the fact of being a historian or not on paper. This is about really how you wake up and think like every day about what you are into, and it's not easy. So I'm pleased to see that I managed to polarize some attention, even from people that allegedly disagree with all the things I said. In that case, just with, I would say, the ban of critical race theory or gender theory, that are grotesque in my opinion. But again, not because of the concept itself, but how it's, of course, wiring to reality. And you immediately understand that there is an ideological struggle going on, even what was happening between Russia and Ukraine, because I could make videos here saying out loud what I think directly, straightforwardly, and that video I made for Ukraine is quite clearly out there saying everything you need to know, really, because I believe in a way that there are some ratios of strength that do not even need an explanation sometimes. And yet, exactly that video, going back to the point, struck me at the point. I say there were a lot of, a number of people who didn't like that and were not supportive for reasons that are kind of obvious and that I'm going to discuss in part, not much in this video, but also in the future, that were evidently from the chunk that I would define as, and I have difficulties to call it right or left, because the whole point of this thing is not right or left. That's an horizontal division. That's how many people like to see the world and themselves like. Whereas, as you know, I have a vertical understanding. There is not nobody denies that there is an horizontal division, right? That this is a multidimensional thing, but the qualitative thought stands in the vertical axis, and the horizontal divisions are somewhat the widening at the bottom of the pyramid, let's say, of the degree of capacity of understanding. I believe that, right? Not that I pretend that there shouldn't be a left or a right, or there shouldn't be a struggle, or that just being right or left is kind of it could be kind of wrong per se, but it's obvious that it exists. I lean right. There is no doubt about this, right? And I'm proud of that because I believe actually that there is a qualitative difference between left and right, and I do believe, yes, the left to be inferior, right? There is no doubt about that. This is what I will be, what is in part also why I have so many alt-righters among my audience, which I wish, it's not much that I wish I didn't have, I just wish I wasn't associated with, right? I've never been attacked for making far-right political propaganda, right? Most of you, in fact, appreciate my neutrality, but of course, if I expose these ideas mostly to leftist people, and I do have leftist, I have everybody here. I have leftist supporters, followers, and supporters, by the way, among my audience, right? I know that, the majority, at least, that flocks my channel is from the right side. So if I were to find a channel that I don't know, the typical follower of a left-wing channel, of course, if I were exposed to those, I would receive like a lot of hatred and all this stuff, and I don't care. Honestly, when I came on YouTube the first time, I was concerned about this thing because I knew more or less what I would have had to come to talk about. At the time, not really, because what I've learned on Schwerpunkt really has been amazing and has brought me forward much more than even that my doctorate and any other experience that I've had. And that's because I've done it myself. It's because every day I've been learning different stuff, which is what I would have never done if I hadn't had this motivation, right? Not even as a historian, not even out there as an assistant, or making lessons or examinations, anything would have pushed me so much as Schwerpunkt has. But of course, the division left and right is mostly let's say a primitive approximation that you need for group dynamics that are, of course, evolutionary. There is so much to left and right in terms of just even biology. Like, it's even about your hormones sometimes. And in this sense, I do not, even though I consider, of course, on average, yes, the left to be worse than the right, and that's why I'm right. I like to see it like this, not because I think that I am actually politically colored, right? But I also don't deny at all, because it happens all the time, really, that, just first of all, being left and right is that discriminant that you need in life. And instead, when I meet with such comments on, from the disappointed wing here, I really see, right, to be the case for most people and worldviews and brains, etc. And I want to think they are the youngsters, right? I want to think they're not the, the even the 30 or the 40-year-old, right? Even less the older ones. But I know, unfortunately, also in reality, it's not really like that, because there are people at 80 that are like children still, and it's not because they never really developed mentally. But it's dramatically easy to find, I don't know, a leftist that is, a much, more consistent human than an alt-right, right? I've met, for example, at university, it's kind of obvious. You meet professors, and you know that more or less there is this, being historically a Marxian influence on university. Yes, I've met a lot of, leftists. We were not really, I didn't meet really with a lot of propaganda at my university, especially haven't met with it in properly history at my department, medievalists and so on, even though I knew probably some of them were very left oriented. In fact, I didn't have much of an opinion of them, in a sense, even as historians in a way. But let's say in their field of expertise, and for that kind of vertical development I was talking about, of course, well, yes, it's dramatically easy to find, I don't know, mentally developed leftist, as opposed to, as you can find easily a mentally developed alt-righter. The point is that, how easy is that, and also how blended is that, and how much actually what we're looking at in terms of leftist and alt-right extremism is actually the misunderstanding that there is a broader cultural underdevelopment all across the board, horizontally speaking. Right, this is the point that I've been gotten to. Not just this is what I think. Really, it's not really much that there is a standard level of kind of moral, intellectual, cultural misery nowadays in ways that we have never witnessed for the sake of civilizational purpose from a historical point of view, but that this is in fact constantly confused as the main dichotomy that you can find there. I personally believe, first of all, and I know I'm putting a lot of stuff into the file, but we will make a video for each one of these topics. But first of all, I think seriously that in the West, that I still recognize as the best in the world. I have no problem with that. I have problems maybe defining what is Western in the ways it's usually done, which are in fact mostly national statelistic in nature, nationalist statalist, but in this sense they are probably socialistic in nature, right? This is great part of the idea is that in Western academies have been, after World War II, as you know, dominated for a long time by a sort of cultural Marxism, and by cultural Marxism I mean properly the fact that, of course, these people do not know what Marxism factually was, so that we use the adjective cultural just to say we're kind of, a bunch of a pain in the behind that have to complain about capitalism, and we have to vote against whoever is right, and liberalize everything, and just trying to propagate this idea that that we should be at the end, because this is what the left gets down to be more lenient towards anything, because who is anybody to impose anything to others in terms of authority or discipline or whatever. This is literally what it gets down to. Like, I haven't found any substance, nor of the communists that I've ever met knew Russian or German in the couple that is needed for studying for years and in an academic fashion Marx and Lenin, without which you cannot be a communist by definition. In fact, you're just a moron. That's where it gets down to. I mean, most of people were really making these complaints about the West from a leftistic, from a communistic, Marxistic perspective, are just basically the disadvantaged. I mean, they're socially envious people who were frustrated for whatever reason it is. Their social status, is their poor education, is their racial discrimination, all things that they must feel the need to impute to somebody else, instead of looking at themselves and saying, grow the fuck up and being a functional human being, and don't bother other people who are doing good for not just for themselves but for you as a consequence, and not even realizing in fact what the West and just what we call capitalism, that is actually also not really an ideology as one way think, as opposed to socialism. They're qualitatively different things, has actually brought you, even from the standpoint of having anything to say, or the possibility of doing it, or even being alive for that matter. So I find that this thing of the post-World War II thing is not. I know what the alt-righters are thinking, that so Schwerpunkt finally is understanding that we have been deprived of the great ethno-nationalistic, idealistic thing. We have been engineered in that sense. Yes, we have been prevented in really from knowing things that before those times were kind of common knowledge, and arguably also some of the most favorite topics. Not just, in fact, this is the point, we should cross out the ethno-nationalistic thing out, because the nature of that, what most alt-righters confuse this, is they don't realize they are just basically ethno-nationalist socialists themselves. There is no such thing like the ideologies popping out in the 19th, in the 20th century that were essentially triggered by the unlocking of the fourth state masses, that is the most, morally and materially inferior people that were out there, to be galvanized by the lowest instincts of such approximate delusions, such as socialism, right? That is the same matrix of all the totalitarian ideologies that we have seen. I mean, communism, fascism, and Nazism are all of socialistic metrics. There are memes out there that make jokes about the fact, I know the difference, what is, that exists between socialism, fascism, and Nazism, and I don't mix them up. Actually, it's pretty idiotic in the first place to pretend that things that exist just by themselves, and this is very categorically and very materialistically, in fact Marxistically oriented, do not have something in common just for the fact that banally we're all human beings. And so in the moment in which you categorize all these things, you deny what is the most macroscopic evidence of human history, that is, we all think things that are mixed together with the others. And of course there is a lot of socialism, but really a lot of socialism in fascism and in National Socialism. By the way, it's not just because it's called National Socialism, it's because how states were run. This state, at least there were also other states under Nazi occupation working like that, but it's not just a name. And not recognizing that, because you presume at that point that you can easily separate the wheat from the chaff in a kind of radically ideological fashion, is really the first way that any person with a tertiary education brought to some standards of, in fact, civilizational dignity will spit you in the face for even thinking. And the worst about and I suffer of this as a conservative, because I realize what the majority of conservatives are, and this is true especially in Europe, I would say. In America it's a different problem, which I think I would get it mostly down to self-referentiality. In Europe it's literally a nationalist statalist problem, right? It's the in fact all the countries of mostly, we're talking about continental Europe altogether, so I would leave the UK out, even for the same, if anything, it's a common law thing in part, not only. But it's disappointing to realize exactly that not just, of course, things like socialism, communism, nationalism, etc. appeared in a time in history only because the wild beast of the fourth state, that is, those were brought down by those indicators of superiority and inferiority that had been set in pre-industrial times, and of course even the ancien regime failed in keeping up with, because that you wouldn't explain otherwise why even the revolutions and these extremistic ideologies happened. Brought to the crystallization of politics, in a sense, in the guise we're witnessing, and that we are confusing just because of the excuse of modernity or secularism, or the fact that everybody has more or less a place where to live or a car and an internet connection, and they don't starve, etc. That any of these people has any kind of value in practical terms when it comes to whatever opinion that they own, right? And so it's an incredibly chthonic, telluric, in fact, probably fourth state kind of slave mindset delusion to that's self-flattering and therefore self-weakening yourself in pretending that being part of a state, of a properly, strictly defined nationalistic reality and or particular background, you are actually provided with any worth from a moral, scientific point of view. This is probably the greatest illness that we're witnessing nowadays. And while it is true that I think that in fact this mentality is mostly leftistic, that is to say, what properly belongs mostly to the Dionysian, dark, irrational, emotionalistic, feminine side, is the and is as opposed to the one that was best exemplified by the idea of fact of rule, of order, of discipline, of clarity, of light, and of force, for that matter, is that this is in fact all a socialist matrix. That is a populist. There are many shades of this, right? But they all get down to the idea that the masses have been flattered since the 19th century into thinking that their collective force as a mass has anything to do with the qualitative force of the individual, which actually does not exist. As a consequence, what we're really witnessing all over is, yes, it is a kind of leftification, right? And what the mistake of right and left actually consists in is, as opposed as as we've seen actually with the incredible spread of pro-Putinism among Western liberals and conservatives for different reasons, but still, is that we are buying to this delusion that the only alternative to things like, in fact, critical race theory or gender theory, etc., is things like Putinism. And what these things are, surprisingly enough, are actually the same. They are the same thing. I mean, they are the expression of the same cultural underdevelopment. And when I speak of this, I really mean it from a historical point of view. But I think most, you see, the only light of, of reason that we have been listening to mostly in the last years, and that I will comment on, mostly gets down to figures like that are being ostracized, at least by attempted to be ostracized by the leftistic. Let's call them establishment at some levels, but I don't think it's really an establishment. It's really, I think it's a trick of the media, right? It's a trick of those who have the means to let us think that this form of radical leftistic extremism is fundamentally a so-called mainstream thing. The term mainstream does not exist. There is no such thing historically like mainstream, right? It's a mistake. And in fact, this is also another problem, how conservatives are buying into all the cultural Marxist mentality and lexicon. That is, we're buying into at least I hope not to, but let's say we all do by a certain degree, to have both this thing, right? It's the same, what would be considered today right-wing ideology of the West being the best that needs really to civilize the world as an example, because we really got it. It's that I largely really believe is the case if it, in relative terms, if it wasn't, of course, that also the West sucks, but the others suck much worse than you can possibly imagine. If you even have even the guts of supporting today's Russia as if it was any cultural model whatsoever. If you even knew anything about, I know Russian literature much better than the French or German or British one, right? I've been studying Russian history for a long time. I talked with thousands of Russians in my life, a lot of people from Eastern Europe, etc. Even there, it's not a matter of distinguish them on a nationalistic basis. It's about realizing the cultural deficit that exists there. It's not a matter of personal opinion, right? What the idiotic alt-righter does today, in some cases at least, is to, because some, of course, have still maintained the Cold War mentality of having pretty clear in mind who was the bad guy, which here is really the point of complete moral disorientation, is that there is kind of that anybody, just think about the flawed logic of all this, is that anybody who counters things like gender theory or racial critical race theory, all this garbage, is automatically endowed with some cultural quality. That tells you how radically inferior from any moral or scientific point of view, of course, these people are. And that's the thing that I have forgotten, because they presume that being from the conservative side qualifies you as a an intelligent person, an educated person, do you know what it means really to be educated, right? Not like you have been educated in any country in the world today in school, right? Really, having a massive structure education, the one you have really to spend your entire life in real work on, right? Not the bullshit that you see here, the Erasmus crap, the programs for underdeveloped countries in the European Union for making them thinking that it just takes to pay them some money or to make them spend some months of education at the King's College for saving them from 70 years of Soviet dehumanization, right? This is the radical delusion. I can say myself that I love Russian culture, as I can love, I don't know, any other culture. I love German culture, I love Spanish culture, I love Swedish culture, whatever. But because when you know it, when you study it, you know what that thing has been about, right? Let's leave aside that historically, of course, the culture is made by, by some people, and that's the meaning of the elite in ancien regime, and that's what, in fact, again, the average ethno-nationalist as well as the average leftist, it doesn't understand that, it's not because you belong to that group that you have any worth by yourself. It's if you accomplish anything that you have any worth by yourself, right? It's not that by strolling, London's roads, you meet with, with a Shakespeare, at every corner, you go, stroll across Rome and you meet Michelangelo or some other genius. Like, the average people have always sucked, right? And one of the reasons why the whole mythology and understanding of historical reality, even from in fact a religious point of view, but all the things that we have explained in those videos about the Indo-European religion, that was in many ways shared, in fact, universally, also by other people, is that, again, it's not what color you are in that cultural chart, but is how much human, that is universal value, you actually have as an individual that makes the difference. And that's why all these cultures insist on the fact that there is not just, of course, a struggle within yourself that determines whether you're worth or not in that regard, and that makes you always challenge that sense, but you already see that there is somebody who rules and somebody who fundamentally obeys, right? And there is a divide between that, because in a way we need both. This is what these mythologies actually say, and this is in many ways what even Christianity says. I mean, we have been too radical, of course, in separating even what we call paganism from monotheism, with two terms that I presume that they don't properly even exist, right? But it's surely a very different thing here, qualitatively speaking, with the absence of any of these beliefs, or at least of the understanding of them, right? Or even the awareness of the existence of the same. That's why we need a right and a left, because I do believe that the right has to command and the left has to complain, right? And that the civilizational input that can derive from the blasting of the left by the hands of the right in disciplining a society with order, clarity, reason, discipline, actual science, and not pure relativism masked, of like science or humanity or good, whatever, that is actually scientism, is just humanitarianism, pacifism, that is some of the most dangerous ideologies that exist in the world, and that in fact also the alt-righters are actually claiming, right? How many are complaining them now? I'll look at what everybody what was happening in Donbass before last month, for years. It's different. These people really cannot distinguish even basic, but I mean elementary political or social, or historical, institutional realities. That is to say, buying into the bullshit that any of the alleged ancestors that they claim to have back in the day, even with millennia of lack of civilization as we have, would have looked down and saying, what were probably massacred them just for saying you're too stupid to be alive. And that complete lack of connection between the two things is disturbing. In a Marxist why are we buying this? Because you see, in a Marxist perspective, this was the myth that we were promised. It's Fukuyama is the end of history illusion. It was the idea that all becoming, with the end of the Soviet Union, things would have solved themselves, right? Let's leave aside the Soviet Union. I made a video explaining you what concretely, the ideology underlying Bolshevism was about, and in many ways how the radical impact of the structural damage had in those countries had such a incredible magnitude that you can't say, after 30 years it's over. You've seen what Russia is doing. Do we need any explanation of that? I mean, if you don't connect the dots, that's your problem. In fact, this is the issue that in many ways the West has forgotten, and that's why it has both in the same Marxist categorical bullshit. Because in many ways the academic elite has spread these ideas, and not only has censored the others, yes, has taken away the others. And thus, the socio-economical promise, right? How much do you, even in language, how much you find among all those geopolitics does not exist. Commentators mix all the time, politics and economy. Politics and economics in their analysis, right? Why shouldn't they, include their politics and, morality or society, or what does it have to be politics and economics, right? Because we have both into the materialistic, technologistic, structuralistic, in fact, materialistic mythology of Marxism. We had been promised that, in countries that would have shared McDonald's, war would have not happened. McDonald's have bailed out of Russia, but maybe one of the few things that the Russians could benefit from in this sense. I have nothing against what we call as capitalism, as you understand, but damn, McDonald's can even be tasty, but after, that your stomach recriminates, I must tell you. And I eat, if I even told you what I eat, right, and I'm not particularly slender, but let's say I'm in shape, you wouldn't believe, because I'm just like an elephant or something. But I don't know how my how my metabolism keeps me still works, by the way, because I know people, if they ate this way, they would reach 600 pounds quite quickly. In any case, this idea of considering everything from an economical point of view, even in what happened with Ukraine here, which is a Clausewitzian principle. How could we misassess? Well, the Russians screwed up everything. They lost the moment they set foot in the country, of course. And that's a problem, because I suspect that Putin is the victim of his own same regime, right? He just like Stalin, right? They were the first people who believed, essentially, in those people who were essentially flattering them. I don't believe Putin is stupid, actually, nor he wouldn't envisage the risk of this all. But the sheer degree of misassessment here has been, I don't know. I've studied lots of wars in my life, but I've never seen anything like this. Like the sheer degree of radical incompetence and strategic illiteracy, but political analphabetism at this point they have seen for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Frankly, I've never seen it in history at no point. Right? I can't properly pick another war or anything that has showed this degree of incompetence in the whole history of mankind that I can think of. But from the Western side, the worrying thing is the fundamentally the the fact we would be considering the resistance of a people just on the base of how many numbers on papers they had, or how many in fact planes or armor or anti aircraft systems that they had, like, could be the discriminant of a war, right? There are many reasons of this that, of course, are not just based on a pure socioeconomical assessment, but the level by which we have said, okay, well, this is just economical. This is not economical. You cannot understand the world in socioeconomical terms, right? If you have been both of this bullshit again, that the world is kind of made up of spheres of influences, of blocks, as if countries were, a monolith that just did that and could not disappear for some reason, that the only interaction is based on how economical and convenient things are. You basically don't know anything about history. Take it from me. It's basically the proof, of course, that the average masses in the world, including the West, are basically undereducated. They properly don't know even the essentials of what it means to study politics or war or society. And the scale of failure is as big as you realize that it doesn't take really like those years of thorough education for it, but just being exposed to the minimal history of the world in interaction. Like, how do you think, don't you see that countries, are broken apart, they reform, they change shape, then they have different borders, and people change mind and language, and things blend together? Don't you realize that? How do you think you can interpret life, ideas, culture, civilization, anything on a socio-economical base if you're not essentially, if your scientific system doesn't derive from a materialistic mentality, right? And we keep insisting on it, which is dramatic. Of course, this is not to say that socio-economical factors are not important, but a bit of order, just considering, economics part of society, just not putting even society or economy on the same base, because what is economics, by the way? I mean, what is economics that already, by default, doesn't tell you that, humans don't even act rationally in anything? So what is also the economical projection, right? That we know that in the analysis, the markets, etc., that there is this, of course, understanding that there are things like fear, like optimism, whatever. The mood is very much studied. But this is like the guy who, I remember now, even 2 years when, the pandemic broke out, said, I was warning and say, you will see what this will bring, right? Because it's obvious that what has happened right now is even connected to COVID in a way or another. If COVID hadn't happened, we would have not had what happened in Ukraine. Definitely. This is what I was talking about. This guy saying, we're full of money, gold reserve, things will fix up, the COVID wouldn't change. And do you think that after 2 years of pandemic, don't you see it under your eyes what has changed politically? What has changed institutionally? What has changed morally? What has changed even in relation with science? What has changed in the ideological nature of this struggle? It's evident. It's under everybody's eyes. And these are the things that change the world, right? But the greater damage, and this is what, in fact, tricks many right-wingers and conservatives in general, is that I've been tricked by that as well. You would be surprised. There was a time, actually, when I was younger, in my, it could be my high school years, could be even my early 20s by a certain degree. I liked Putin, right? I liked not him, really. I know he was really like a son of a bitch, but I liked the idea of what many conservatives presume to think about what Putin's Russia is supposed to stand for, right? And I know perfectly the mechanism of the delusion, because then eventually I learned a lot of things and I understand the instinct, and I understand why that would bring you there, right? But what tricks you is exactly beneath also what you have been already been disoriented enough, like through this forced kind of cultural Marxistic influence that we got mostly from the world of education in the West. And it is, again, what I was saying before, that is the delusion of not having understood the world, but in terms that post-dated the 18th, the 19th century. All those videos that I make about Indo-European history, you would be surprised to know that have struck me at this point. I would probably write something serious about this, and maybe I shouldn't be that vocal on the internet about that. But I think how that handling that in this way is still safe. That they overlap dramatically, not just with von Clausewitz for that matter, but basically any other evolutionary, biological, or just even scientific, anthropological understanding that we have about humanity. They were not a, let's say, they were not exactly, in fact, they were a universal message, as we were saying before. They weren't really addressed to a specific kind of people or culture, right? These were things that those people believed and behaved like in a fashion that for them was necessary, right? Why would they believe these things? The average alt-righter ethno-nationalist today would think because they were white, right? Because they were Caucasians, because they were Aryans, because they were pro-Indo-Europeans, whatever you want to call them, like. We've gotten to the point that if you say Aryan, people exchange you for a Nazi, because say, that's what they knew in Nazi times. You know what Arya actually means? Aryan stems from Arya, means noble, right? This is one of those names that is typical of steppe people's ethnogenesis that didn't give a damn about race. It was just about maybe the spiritual race, that is how tough you were, and that were terribly inclusive in a brutal way, because these were chieftains, leaders that wouldn't mind to massacre, rape, and enslave anybody else, like any other culture at the time. It's just that for some chance of history, they arrived, let's say, to more comprehensively to lay out a moral system that was kind of superior to others, and that probably also we know in this regard, because again, I believe in the uniqueness of what we call as the West, and I still believe it's an accident, right? Because if you don't accept the fact that yes, there may be a purpose, there may be a deterministic mechanism in the world, but there may be connected with God and everything, but at the same time, what we're really left with in reality is that we cannot. Not only we cannot predict what is going to happen, but exactly these moral systems were telling you that you cannot predict them, and thus you have to be that tough and determined and clear and wise and intelligent. And in fact, this is the main divide that ethno-nationalists do not really understand, is that the core of these principles necessitate of living through neurocognitive experiences that, first of all, today we cannot really replicate. That is not if you are a thug in some periphery that goes around and breaking skulls and getting drunk, is replicating the experience of Bronze Age war bands, right? You maybe go closer to that as far as certain aspects are, but if you had just met with some of them, you would have been turned into pulp, before just crying like a bitch and praying to be spared. And so you would have perfectly fit in that pelasgic, inferior, chthonic, telluric subculture that the Europeans came to dominate violently. And there is nothing really nice about this all from the side of those who succumbed, but not probably even from the side of those who prevailed, but that expresses you the civilizational necessity, even of clarity and knowledge and light, right? Of course, the average ethno-nationalist thinks to be, kind of endowed with some great experience and, knowledge and clarity and light, but even if you investigate what kind of idea they are, they're just like fixated with one specific people who they believe that they believe to have had just this special knowledge. Like, the average type is, the guy who's obsessed with Vikings, and thinks that all the other peoples were kind of inferior to them, where he doesn't know that maybe, not just you cannot study or understand anything about even Viking sagas if you don't study the Vedic or the Roman or ones, just to make an example, or that these even exist and what the hell actually are. And why don't you even know that they existed, secondly, but also that somebody else really achieved that degree of greatness that those northern peoples didn't really ever achieve in any historical times. Look, I mean, things like Alexander or the Roman Empire or other things that guy would reject culturally, because as an ethno-nationalist, it's just an abortion of national statalism and communitarism. That is to say, all those principles and ideologies that the Aryans would have never believed in. In fact, ethno-nationalism is an anti-Indo-European ideal, right? The ethnos was important, but not ethnicism, right? And even less nationalism, right? Because these cultures were based on a radically aristocratic and oligarchic and elitistic mentality. That is to say, if you are, again, that thug with no education, with no accomplishments, that just bit his girlfriend and, doesn't read any book and thinks this bullshit about history, you are fundamentally scum, and as such you will be treated. Also because you're really inferior, right? If you don't call the whole principle of the light of the north, the clarity, the Apollo, the properly whatever in the Indo-European culture was identified with the superior good, and with actually really a monotheistic idea, because not monotheistic maybe in the way we have gotten habituated with what we call monotheism, which still, however, is the same thing, right? It just came to be formalized in ways by the degeneration of secularization, and not because people ever at that time, I don't know, during the Enlightenment or the 19th century, or atheism as it spread in this mass society, has anything to do with that, right? Was identifying the superior principle with actual knowledge, right? The wisdom that you talk about at the end of the day is not just a primitive understanding of interrelation with a mafia clan, like most of the tribalism that these ideologies stem from actually presumed to resuscitate without understanding anything, but it stemmed from the only possible goal ever, that was the rule of the world and the individual superiority to the point of essentially a divine transfiguration. Do you see any of this among the scum of leftist and alt-rightist extremism that resembles a person that would transfigurate because of his heroic deeds into a divinity? Don't you realize that that's fourth state Pelasgian telluric crap that is what all the Indo-European culture despised as inferior and as subjugated, and that was in fact up to a few 100 years ago, just because the masses were framed within that hierarchy and now just let loose without any control, any discipline, and any kind of order, right? Normally tribalists, ethno-nationalists speak of order and all these things, in fact, in anti-imperialistic sense, which is yet another delusion of the modern mind. The idea that for some reason it's so bad that, there were things like the Roman Empire, where there were some tribes that were fighting for their own freedom, as if, by the way, the Romans weren't really a tribe who managed to demonstrate their radical moral superiority to subjugate all the others around, right? And for which ethno-nationalists have to resume to the bullshit that Romans conquered the world because they were kind of evil, or they had technology and all this crap. Well, they actually don't face the macroscopical evidence supported by all the Indo-European religions that the Romans were actually the only ones who managed to achieve what all those tribes had wished to achieve, but simply were too underdeveloped to do. And this is the same thing that we're witnessing today with Russia, right? It doesn't take to be an empire to be good or bad, right? Even the smallest tribe behaves like an empire, right? do mafia clans do, right? Hush money, but that's an empire. That's all how tribes worked. It's also how before states think, well, because there was no other way to control any of that. So whoever achieves more is because, of course, the supreme deity of the sky confers the Aryan glory to these peoples that go out there with the symbols of the same, with the eagle that is universal, all of these people to conquer the entire world. How many of post-socialist, ethno-nationalistic, frustrated atheists that have still some kind of racist bias towards any other country that doesn't fit the ones they would like to emulate just because they look whiter than the average, let's say in the are referred to the north when they go to emigrate, that haven't told you that, I don't know, Christianity is so crippled and bad, and that it's so much easier to kill in the name of God than in the name of Woden, because paganism instead was such a cute, nice thing. This is the cultural abortion that we have been creating for generations. I mean, people devoid of any kind of schooling education that are let out there in the world without any responsibility, with any regulation, without any capacity, without any understanding, without any competence. By the way, without any future, because we know now that Generation Z has nothing basically to lose. And so this is what will fall again into the dark pit of the telluric element, those who wanted to storm the Asgard with the beast, the masses, the subjugated slaves at the end of times. These are the people that we are creating. These are the people who are supporting regimes like the Putinian one. And the light is from the other side. And the other side is not alternatively, again, critical race theory or gender theory. I care about this because that is just the other part at the low level of cultural development, or simply at the level of cultural underdevelopment, that would respond to that. What all these people don't see is that there is something above their heads, because these people are slaves. They just look down. They're habituated to be that. They're habituated to succumb to fatalism, to the reason why they're just complaining on the internet instead of making all these great deeds of overthrow. I mean, if you are the depository of this great culture and values and strength, why are you why are supposedly the leftists even dominating you? Why don't you go out there and do something about that? Not just being a passive aggressive hysteric paranoid psychopath on the internet, just saying other people, you have no idea how many comments I get from people that you click on their profiles, they have something talking about culture camping, or having, making veiled references to the fact that if they speak in their country, I mean, in places like the United States, in places like, in Europe, that their government will take them out, or they can't be say that there's this conspiracy. Yes, I mean, if you look at American policy, something disgusting is happening, but the U.S. is a freaking democracy with a hell of a check and balancement system that is actually bringing on the fore again conservatism, because there has been an enormous backlash and reaction. Unfortunately, great part of why this still doesn't work and is creating still more damage, adding more damage to what the left is doing, is that, again, the majority of conservatism are fourth state, undereducated people without any actual cultural value. Because they think that if they buy into, I don't know, if they click on Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, they are somewhat more special than others. They don't study, they don't research, they don't know these things exist. They don't understand that if Ukraine falls, they will have to pay much more than the higher gas that they're paying now. They're completely alienated from reality, and they will just keep complaining about that. It is to say, let's make this place functioning again. Now, the best thing you can do is just, Joe Biden is a senile imbecile. He is. He's an idiot. So his administration is. They're evil, objectively. They're ideologically wicked. But this has nothing to do with the fact that you should support Putin in the process. Because if you don't understand even what is going on in Ukraine, if you don't understand what resources Ukraine has, if you don't understand the world's balance, if you don't understand what Russia could do after Ukraine, if it's won, And that will happen if you keep complaining because you have to pay more for using a car. I'm sorry, but you actually deserve to live a slave, to live in misery, because you can't understand banal differences. What do you think that isolation compared to the world will add to your cultural superiority? Do you think that keeping your world smaller is actually a way to say I'm a better person? Keeping the world smaller is exactly what people were forced to do during the Soviet Union. The least you thought or hoped for yourself is just, the need of surviving and being alone, detached from reality, in a paranoid, hysterical situation where you're not touched by any pressure of any kind, at least, on the surface, is no better than leftists whining because they want their safe space and having their own, not hearing words they hurt you. What if you acknowledge that you're a failed, 30 years old without any education, with no factual achievements, because you've been told that studying is just, being indoctrinated by Marxists, and, why can't you do it by yourself then? And, you basically maybe, you would also screw up your marriage and you have to maintain your ex with your children. You will see, every once in a while, because objectively you suck as a human being, and there is no morality or value system. You stay all the fucking day glued on Tinder or eating chips while watching Netflix, and while the world goes on with people that want to actually take you out because they hate your fucking guts, and you hope that just isolating is a way to solve any problem, right? There are very few conservatives nowadays that have a clear view of the freaking wall. I was very disappointed at so many American conservatives in the last weeks. There are very few ones who kept the thing steady, and they're not the leftistic ones, right? I can make a few names. Before, for example, I mentioned Shapiro, that is one of the few guys that I actually estimate, and not just because of the mythology it has been created around him. He also has some views. For example, he doesn't, it's not that he has a broader international or strategic education, whatever. He doesn't leave that. You have got to appreciate he studied law. He has an understanding, of course, also international policy. He's a great man, whatever. He's the only person who, didn't say anything about the necessity, for example, of imposing sanctions on Russia. He just maybe complained about how the solutions, how the countermeasures, like for, keeping Western economies afloat, were being managed, which actually a problem. But many other of his same crew, and I don't know how he will handle that in the next weeks, actually took a completely different path. That is, I don't want to pay higher gas price. Right? Why didn't our presidency say anything? Do you have to wait for a president of a country, of a modernistic, statalistic reality for you to have a universal value? What are the values that you actually claim as a conservative to treasure in the moment in which you whine like a bitch because you have to pay a higher gas price while there are people, women and children, and being hit deliberately because there is a fucking authoritarian regime that wants to eliminate a country from the face of the earth on the grounds that they're just a bunch of repressed, underdeveloped psychopaths that are realizing that their fucking state is going bankrupt. Because, by the way, people don't make children anymore in Russia. People don't have really a satisfactory education in Russia because the whole freaking thing is sinking badly, right? And you try to project on them, well, they're just doing it for defending us from what? From trances and all these things? I mean, do you need to be defended by trances by an authoritarian regime that shoots over women and children? What a fucking degenerate are you? I hope, really, that you're going to be in the place of those same women and children quite soon. Because this is the meaning of civilization. And I could go much harsh on that, because actually this is all what is going on in my mind right now. And I think I have to speak of these things because the again, that vertical horizontal axis is not really out there. Nobody talks about this stuff. Nobody says, just pray for Ukraine. You can argue what I'm doing here right now. Myself, I admit that in 2014 I contacted a contractor in my country to go fight in Ukraine, for Ukraine, of course. And today, I simply admit it. I don't have the guts to go fight in Ukraine either, but at least I think that I should say a bunch of things that could wake up, not much on Ukraine, that is not really, it could be Ukraine, could be another country, right? It's not that I know I have Ukrainian followers. There was a guy, I was struck, that was once, I don't know how he's faring, by the way. If he's out there, I'd like him to speak out, because he said he was going to be enlisted in the conscription there, and I really wish him best luck. But it's not that I do it because I even make a discount or I bend ideologically, because I think, I don't know, that Ukraine or Ukrainians, who knows which kind of awareness that they have. I've been talking to lots of Ukrainians myself. I must say that, of course, they also kind of share, unfortunately, as a post-Soviet country, the issues that historically they suffered. They share that degree of alienation from the world. I mean, I had to explain to people I knew in the weeks before the invasion, like what is NATO, or the day the invasion started. One of these people I knew, she told me, I told her, look, they're bombing Kiev and Kharkiv right now, and the answer she gave him was, but the thing was just in Donbass. I mean, don't you know that there is 3/4 of conventional Russian forces deployed at your borders? What kind of surprise it is. You understood these people live completely out of the world, and most Westerners actually have started to live out of the world as well. And this has happened not much just because of decolonization or because of the fact that there are other states emerging and we don't quite manage the world like once we needed, and we needed to, right? But because we're seeing it right now, IQs are going down after generations of that were not really that good either, because this is again the other, as I was explaining there, with the unlocking of the fourth state, and even previously. We lacked mostly scientific understanding, but with the increase of scientific understanding, we have decided not to keep up anymore with our moral standards. So, yes, there is a lot of science out there, a lot of knowledge, but how many people actually learn about that? What happened historically is, of course, that at times like the Indo-European ones, as we're describing in our videos, people had an enormous moral force, which meant that they had to live in ways that, it's not that they were tough much, because they could rip people in half from a moment to another. It's that the entire system was dramatically more dangerous, right? Your life expectations were ridiculous. The efforts you had to make just to live in terms of calories, of working force, of technology, of ways to were enormous, right? So people necessitated constantly this kind of difficulty, and still at the time the most advanced civilization said, oh wait, we're kind of crumbling morally because we got richer and people are kind of now feeling lazier and they don't really want anything, they don't feel the need to do anything more. It's the same old story. But what happened since the Industrial Revolution, since the Enlightenment, is that at least our scientific understanding of the world went up, right? And went up in a way that allowed us to, again, rely mostly on these material resources. Hence, also why why an ideology like communism broke out, because of course this overabundance of resources nobody had ever seen historically made these people that, especially the masses that were being exploited by them, saying, okay, it must be, the interpretation of the word must be materialistic. It must be about the capital. It must be about the evil owner who exploits the workers, all this bullshit. And they would believe that because what did they have to lose? They were just socially envious. They objectively lived in garbage at the time. So, there is no doubt that the struggle of the workers was a big deal in terms of civilization over the generations. But by, let's say, the 60s, the 70s of the 20th century became ridiculous, especially in the measure it kept remaining just an ideology, because basically the differences were leveled, right? And especially today, right? Yes, things are going worse in a sense, but they're not going worse because the living conditions are, being imposed on you by something. It's because you just have stopped working. And what people don't understand anymore, what it means to work. It means to work doesn't mean to be mentally alienated. Working doesn't mean just, waking up every day at 6 a.m. to work for 8 hours in an office, in a dead-end job that you find disgusting. Working in this sense means if you don't like that, you change that, because the ways your parents or grandparents lived and worked are ways that just by the moral background they would use they would trigger in order to cope with that would make you a millionaire in a few years, right? If you really wanted to exploit it, to really work, to really sharpen your mind and boost your morale, but you don't want that. All what you want is not going to work so that you can spend your day on the freaking couch without doing anything, right? And while it is true that, if you lived like that, you would get bored and probably you would start doing things that are productive. And so that, yes, you kind of need some stability to be productive. And so, yes, I give you your due, as there might always be the need of having a right and a left in that way. Still, your let's say your will to achieve more is superior in terms of importance to whatever softening and lazening and whatever can lure you into. In other words, that's the reason why I believe, of course, the right is superior to the left, just as the same reason why I think that thoughts are superior to matter, because matter just stays there, right? It can't change in ways we can't control, because the universe moves for forces that we still have to understand. But still, damn, that if you want to change matter, you are the only one who can make the difference. And until you understand, you don't realize that, there's really nothing you can do. This was understood, of course, by people like, I don't know, if you listen to Jordan Peterson and you realize why he's so successful and so on. But I will make a video on him soon, because I love the guy. I think has done a terrific job. But there is something so much that I think has been missing by scale, and especially historically speaking, because he got everything right. I mean, from the Jungian perspective, the archetypal symbolism in mythology, even the same Christianity that, of course, maintains a mix between left and right. It's not just pure idealism like in Indo-European religion, whatever. That is spot on, because we have to, of course, think as if matter limited us. We can't just think to be just Übermenschen without any control, like an Indo-European shift in belief, right? Because he was forced by the circumstances. Here we have to realize that we have an extra gear that those guys didn't have. It was science, right? The only problem is that we have used that as an excuse to sink morally. And that's the reason why science has become the new, in a scientistic way, people think, without understanding nothing about that it is an alternative to religion, while it is actually complementary, and both things do not work if you don't couple them. Jordan Peterson missed a lot of the extremes of this, right? He agreed that, after all, even what are the extreme consequences of the archetypal meanings he found, right? If you study Indo-European religion or any other religion, this is what I say. I talk a lot about Indo-Europeans, but you can study these things. You can find even in other cycles. You can find it even among Native Americans, because again, this was a universal understanding of reality. It's not the cultural compartmentalized thing that communitarists, ethno-nationalists want to make you believe, like, here we do it in Europe just because we have this face and we look the way we do and the others don't. has nothing to do with that. It's just that in Europe, for some grace of God, we managed to do it before the others, right? And we have this moment in the darkening of the light, the duty to resume that. So again, don't make the asinine mistake to go look at the moral superiority among peoples that do not have any of that moral superiority, because there is not. The only this mentality is what the Indo-Europeans loaded among the Pelasgic that they conquered when they arrived in Europe, because those were fatalistic. That is, they were shifting their moral center of gravity to something external to them, that were the agricultural deities of the earth, of the underworld. They thought that it would not matter what they did, they could always be contaminated and they would be from a moment to another, so that they would die, would be swallowed by the deities of the underworld, and would be simply regenerated into something else that didn't have anything to do with them. And the Europeans thought in their soul, heroically ascending to the skies, if they had achieved their most individual, complete, transfiguration, literally, into a religious military sense, so accomplishing this enormous work of conquest and control and discipline, informing and ordering and clarifying, that entirely depended on them, and they thought there was only one truth and one God and one real order in the universe. They spoke the language of the stars. Literally, because our entire European languages are still, in the way they sound, wired to that. I will have to make a video on that. We are speaking the same language of the stars, those peoples believed. In the sounds, in our vowels, in our consonants, they are the same freaking thing. And we have, this is yet another thing, we have completely been stripped off of this understanding. Yes, after World War II, and not because, again, the Nazis or the fascists were right. Again, they were just a bunch of socialists. That's what they were. They had this pinch of nationalism into it that, yes, differently from communism, that basically empties humanity of any kind of value, does tell people that they can't be superior individually. But to that point, they were still doing that by fueling the masses in their lowest instincts, and therefore kind of leveling them and exploiting them for their murderous, genocidal, anti-democratic ideals. And democracy means that everybody is strong in the same community, everybody is intelligent and moral. Just think about what Warwick could do. Why was the West superior? Because if objectively we maintain this balance between values and wealth distribution. We had consensual government, we accepted authority, but we also accepted resistance. This was present also in Christianity. It was present also in the previous system, in the same pagan system, in the European one. This was the same idea, that there had to be an authority, but this authority was to be accepted as long as it managed, as a, in terms of properly of example, to fuel that superiority into the among the rest of the people. So the measure of that would be managing to conquer the world, right? Whereas you can find an obedient people that just obeys because they're terrorized, because they are prevented to know whatever happens outside, because they're lied to, because they are properly stripped of the truth. In the Ravenna, if the commander said even a lie, the glory of the sky would go back to heaven, and the guy would be dead, killed by his enemies, right? So look at what happened to communist regimes. Look at what happened at totalitarian regimes. Why do you think they collapsed? And why do you think instead that countries in their own sounder reality kept existing after centuries and centuries and centuries, like we can see in Europe? On the base, by the way, of these pre-existing people who knew what their balance between these things really were. This is the answer. If you side either with the Dionysian leftistic bullshit that has almost taken over America, it will be overthrown. And if you buy into the authoritarian, paranoid, moral and materially miserable Russian regime, you will always be a radically inferior individual, and you will die into nothingness, like Indo-Europeans thought of people who reasoned like you, because your soul would disappear into nothingness. That's hell. It's the absence of life. Whereas heaven is only when the individual accomplishes anything. You can accomplish anything in a country where you're lied to, where if you get out, you will be beaten, and where the people doesn't have the force that always has in any single community all over history, in any place, to overthrow their tyrants. If those people don't, it's always their fault. There is no such thing like a totalitarian regime, like dictatorship, an authoritarian regime managing to enforce itself. It's always, always, always the people's fault. Always. Always. In fact, it's disgusting to read even places, I don't remember what was the CNN or the BBC, that, that were somebody was daring to complain about the sanctions because, at this point, it's Putin we're fighting. I'm sorry, we're not fighting Putin. We're fighting Russia. This has nothing to do with the fact that you can be Russian and perfectly decent, strong, brave person. And we find so many of Russians doing that. But if the entire system still sides with the regime, it's the entire system. The definition is this, that a government has the capacity of sustaining itself only when it has the decisive moral support of the population, which doesn't mean, by the way, that it has to be the majority of the people. That's the other, materialistic mentality, and considering every individual equal and exchangeable, like the Marxists would like to make you believe. This is about the moral force. That is to say that moral force could be unevenly distributed. It could be just 10 people, like, think about Russian oligarchs that own all the power and the control in many ways, but not because the people cannot assume themselves a moral force on their own. They're not. They're choosing deliberately, or maybe, of course, they're too ignorant and too, alienated and too disconnected from the world. Hell, there are certain realities there that I have seen myself that are terrifying. Right? I've met people who said, things like, I never learned to learn the ABC by heart because, who cares? It doesn't purpose. There's no purpose in the world. This person was the same one that when she offered me, naked photos for money, right, on the internet, right? So you understand perfectly the level of cultural underdevelopment we're talking about. We're talking about people without any moral force, deprived of any moral force. Inject moral force that comes from knowledge, from science, from clarity, from courage, from truth. And that thing will collapse. And the only reason why we are dealing with this situation at this point is that is the proof of the absence, of the emptiness that people exchange, like for a color, or a substance, because there is a flag, because there is a propaganda, because there is an idea that is in their mind allegedly freeing them from the garbage they see in their own culture. At the same time, congratulations, you're being played with. You're a slave. You're not a master. And this is the beauty of it, that within yourself you know that. Because in order to side with such realities, you are perfectly aware of the fact that you're a frustrated, disadvantaged, uneducated, marginalized, impotent person. You know that, you feel that, but you're a human being like any other. So you always have the possibility to become something else, right? And the reason why I was saying before that figures like Peterson were so successful, because for the first time to this mass of mostly alienated, frustrated, regressive young men, because that is mostly where it got down to, where cultural Marxism from our academies spread the myth, the lie of sexist equality, or of, just countered by any biological or historical anthropological evidence, maybe you should take in consideration. And of course, it's very convenient for a Marxist to erase any kind of that knowledge, like they did in as we know, in the Soviet Union. They sent, scientists in Siberia when they discovered there were things such as things like generic inheritance that could affect, character, predisposition, because they wanted to erase any cultural value whatsoever that could stand within a person, any connection, any solidarity that wasn't blind subservience to an enslaving regime that would just use you whatever he pleased like. This is what the same Marxists are doing in the West. This has nothing to do with you not recovering what up to a few generations ago was normal. We Westerners are superior. And we're not superior because we're born white or any of this crap. We are superior because historically we have been superior, and we should struggle to maintain the upper hand, given that the rest of the world seems to be messed up enough in terms of basic principles for us to be extremely wary, as we're seeing while civilians are being slaughtered in the thousands just by something that we consider to be, even at least similar to the West, because whether Russians like it or not, they are Westerners, as a matter of fact, just to a lesser degree. But they are white, they speak a European language, they Westernized historically, and that's it, right? How you can't consider them if not Westerners. That's the proof of what a lesser degree of civilization makes on a people. And civilization, again, is universal. This could happen somewhere else. It happened among us, but we have this thing doesn't stay up by itself. It must be constantly refueled and hopefully spread in the world, right? Understanding morality and science, in this sense, is one, right? It's not about being right or left. It's about being an accomplished individual. Because when you're an accomplished individual, you achieve things, you elevate yourself, right and left lose any relevance. And the reason why we're polarizing so much is a perfect mirror of the cultural underdevelopment that both left and right have assumed. So don't be flattered because you are from one side or another if you haven't accomplished anything. I know that you don't want to hear from anybody that telling that most people are scum objectively is antipathetic and kind of offensive, insulting. But isn't it real? Like, dude, isn't it what, after all, everybody really thinks? And or the majority of people were kind of, okay, who cares? Or just the ones who were keeping that word small, not to essentially admit that that's the case and that more than else they are exactly the cause of the problem by reasoning like that. That's it. So what things like that I was disappointed by, mostly by conservatives in that regard, is the measure in which they rooted for this sclerotization of the position, right? And there is a sort of cowardice in it too, right? There is nothing courageous or correct in what they're doing, because it seems to me that this backlash that we have witnessed, fortunately, let's say, of conservatism over the liberal extremism, radical subjectivism, moral relativism, and so on that we've seen spreading at an incredible rate ever seen. Like in 10 years, look at what happened in the U.S. Like it's as if everything changed almost overnight, right? It's on the basic principles. Do you know why it happened? Because those principles were not substantiated by any understanding anymore. So that people were just going on by, remembering, saying, my parents told me this, but then what is there to that? And then being lured and corrupted and, simply depraved by such ideologies. Why? Because there's no cultural resistance. Right, that thing that, I don't know, as Europeans, as assholes, we like to do, that the fact that Americans are radically ignorant, and that actually applies to ourselves as well, is actually true, right? This is also what liberals and conservatives acknowledge, because just stop a person in the street, they don't even know the year of the American Revolution, or the date of the Declaration of Independence, or things like these. Like, you know, it's not that they don't know it because they say, oh, I forgot, but I know what it is. Like they say, when it was like in the 1950s, like literally, you go look at videos on the internet, and so like that, and it's not one person that says something extremely stupid. It's like, you know, people in their 60s now, right? So somebody who was allegedly, you know, part of the greatness of. So you see, many critics will use this as saying, yeah, you see, so the West was never great. I agree in absolute terms. Like, nobody was ever great in this world. Like, there was not a country where ever people were satisfactorily schooled or intelligent or capable. It doesn't exist. But again, this doesn't take out that still the West is the best we had, and we still have. So that should make you extremely terrified from one side, but still saying, you know, let's capitalize still on what we were, not on demolishing the freaking thing, as instead Marxists would like you to do, because they hate, of course, the whole system, because they hate themselves, because they realize that they have taken a path in their lives for whichever disadvantage or frustration or envy for which they will never fix themselves, and so they prefer to make the whole freaking boat sink, rather than doing anything productive. But they are the weak side. They are exactly the morally empty and inept and cowardly side. If you have this great values that you think as a conservative to have, it can't be that you have, right? It's transversal, right? If there are so many, there's such a large amount of dumb leftists on the cross of the population, that doesn't that ring some bell? Is it the problem? What is the problem? They popped out just like mushrooms out of somewhere. Don't you think that the large majority actually of conservatives are just disgusting as well? And that is a broader universal problem that you have to solve with a universal language, not thinking of yourself again, you know, I'm saved because I'm from the side of the special ones. Doesn't quite function. And the reason, again, I want to finish the damn thing about Peterson, is that, again, he doesn't achieve a historical fulfillment. It doesn't take the matter to the extremes, right? If you study, for example, as we were saying before, the differences between sexes, there is nothing like genders. Right, genders, yes, you can create them, but who's going to use them if they don't correspond to the actual only two sexes that exist? And don't tell me about those other combinations, because of course they exist, but they are, you know, exceptions. And even if, you know, we should owe some respect to people that are born in those conditions, still, this has nothing to do with the fact that we as human beings are going to stay divided between men and women, genetically point, and that gender is at that point not something you can make a lot of relativism in, unless you don't want to artificially engineer an eradication of any cultural capacity, not to allow anybody to, again, distinguish anything, and therefore to turn into slaves, like in a totalitarian regime, right? What is ridiculous of this all from a conservative side, if you're really so scared of these things, that's also another problem of yours, right? If you're scared of things like, you know, sexes being equivocated to be, you know, obscured or clothed by something like gender, but wouldn't it be the problem that you are not able to defend those values anymore because you're a fucking slob, maybe, without any morality or scientific understanding? Well, just asking, right? Historically, you can see how this was the case. You see, if a Peterson has to compromise with, you know, he's a clinical psychologist and probably also a good one. I don't think that, you see, these figures are are geniuses. I don't think so. I think they're just well educated people with a broad culture and great experience and capacity that are essentially what we would need as at least the average professional. Because, you know, I frankly, just even the way he speaks and everything is just, you know, good as other professionals I've met are. Right? And he's right when they say that there is a war on excellence. What does excellence mean, though? Right? Excellence means keeping to pursue a greater understanding. I mean, if you are morally driven, you should just go into the scientific detail. I think that Peterson most of the times just throws out some principle. In a sense, I digress a lot, so I couldn't criticize him for not getting to the point, but at least I consider my speeches circular, getting to the point. And what it seems he does in that instance is not actually really, following a distorted path in his mind. He's actually trying not to say something that could be too hurtful to people. Such as the fact, for example, when he's asked, if differences, if so-called gender gap is not to be eliminated, is this a positive or negative thing? He remains pretty vague in a sense, because he says, we don't know, or we don't understand it, or we have no way to tell. Actually, we would. Actually, we would have a way to say that. Why don't we say that there is actually a pretty macroscopic evidence between sexes, and that this is obviously spoken on average terms. Of course, you can find a woman doing dramatically better what mostly men, for some biological reasons, tend to be structurally better at. Nobody denies that. Once you have established that, can you establish that what exactly the average you just measured your judgment on actually proves you that men and women are radically different and they're supposed to be like that for a functional development of a community? Why can't we be so direct, harsh, and straightforward on this? We need discipline. We don't need lenient things. That's why I don't like when it was Peterson on the Australian television. There was a woman who was, I don't know, she was a politician, but she was obviously from a leftist side. She called herself a feminist, whatever. At a certain point, he told, I mean, she was hideous probably if you hate that kind of leftistic idea, but, you would listen to her. And Peterson sometimes said, look, because he tries to compromise, right? Because as a clinical psychologist, he knows how important it is. This, if you follow his videos, this idea that giving something, taking something, negotiating, having a dialogue, that's very important. But he said something I would never compromise on, and that we should recover exactly the same intransigent principle of, that is to say, he said at some point, look, I'm okay with, feminism, actually. He stated that. It's one of his most famous videos out there. He said, I'm actually supportive of feminism. That's an enormous mistake, because, you see, feminism is the equivalent of masculism. Here we are even modifying, engineering vocabulary, dictionary, etymologies, right? I don't side with any sexist ideology. Feminist is a sexistic ideology. There is a huge difference that any literate person would just even know in terms between something like emancipation and or simply having equal rights, or as a base of pool of rights that we have in our juridical systems, and something like feminism that is just ideologism, as masculism would be, right? And the fact, again, that men and women are different, and they're different even in this sense, in the way hierarchies work, so that men on average being more aggressive, more competitive, and having this more, this type, or tend to be more at the top, and they tend it basically in any culture, in any civilization. The question is, maybe it's because that's how we are supposed to be, evolutionarily speaking, and what good do you think you can do in trying to mitigate this artificially without thinking that this thing could backfire on the base of nature? You can't bend nature to ideas, and again, you need an ideology like the Marxists want to pretend that this is bullshit, up to denying genetics, but also properly emptying people of any sense of what they may feel and want to do, within the limits, of course, of banal things. You shouldn't, oppress anybody. You should let any person be free to pursue what they want. Of course, it's going to be competitive at some point, and if for some reason this competition is harder for somebody, and the disgusting participation of male athletes together with in female sports, with the excuse of the pure excuse, because there is nothing there, of transgenderism, is a farce. right? And the worst about that is not that these people are allowed by some idiot to do that. That regulates the sport, because if you were a woman that competes in that sport, you should desert the freaking place and leave that man performing alone, showing that nobody wants to live in a world that is against nature and upside down just to pretend that a mental illness is actually, to be flattered and encouraged and incentivized. Because mental illnesses like paranoia, hysteria, denial of reality, all this stuff is exactly what was used in totalitarian regime to fuel hatred, to let countries invade others, to wipe them out, and to let these people passively just operating the thing, which is what we're openly seeing in Ukraine right now. And for a reason. Again, you don't emerge like a normal country, mentally, culturally, whatever, after 70 years of scientifically organized, or at least pseudo-scientifically organized dehumanization on a totalitarian base. You don't. You can't. And so giving all these, leaving the benefit of the doubt for things that you should elementarily know that cannot be erased, is making you guilty in an irreparable way, because we are paying the price of that right now. To the point that a bunch of people that would be talented, full of potential, and capable, and that could reach, like every single body, something great, are brought into the ranks of, alt-rightism, racism, Putinism, all this bullshit, because they presume, from the complete absence of any effective education by any scientific standard, that the entire point of life is being in a cosmic clash against something so childishly idiotic like critical race and gender theory. I mean, that is the dragon that you want to slay? What is the dragon of existence to you then? How can you be an accomplished individual if you think that those are your actual scary enemies? Fight against real targets, fight against real institutions. You're not fighting against that fictional cards, castle, useless thing. You're fighting actually against ignorance. You're fighting against frustration. You're fighting against imagination. You're fighting against lack of culture. Give culture to people. Give knowledge to people. Give them their superiority. And they will start making things work, and these things will disappear. I don't believe that those ideologies will make any headway, not more than I think that Putinism would make any headway. Because they're non-existent. They are negative values. They're not positive values. They don't count. They're the ones Europeans, they were sure of their victory about. But that they also know how to fight, because they realized that the only reason why they could exist as a civilization was to crush those systematically. And if, again, the best thing you can do in those terms is siding with evil that you can't even recognize, it means that you are the problem, that you are the culturally underdeveloped one. You are the fourth state, Dionysian, emotionalistic, fatalistic, lunatic who's not capable of putting his act together and making any positive effort in this. So again, if you are to prevail in your mind somebody who is inferior to you by definition, it's because you are inferior as well. And you should be very, very worried about yourself. And you should also be very honest to yourself, because you perfectly know, as every human being does, what they are doing wrong and trying to mask it in front of others. And others know that, because I know from the comments what, even before you write them, what you're going to write. And I know why you're wrong even before you think to write what will make others understand that you're wrong. Because I know where you come from. I know where you have been. That's the vertical difference. It doesn't take much to elevate yourself at the point that you immediately understand it. This is the joke about this people, that they think they own some kind of sacred holy grail knowledge that others don't understand. Everybody understands, with those who have a minimal elevation of what you think you know and why. We read in your brain. And it doesn't take much, again. And the only reason why you think that this is maybe an act of arrogance to say, it's because you're habituated to the same level of inferiority that you're allegedly spotting into, the left, but that you don't understand is actually part of yourself as well. And we all have the degree of inferiority, by the way. We all have. Because we all have the choice to do not... You see, again, it's not horizontal. It's not like a test, yes or no. The vertical thing is much deeper, because it's how far can you go. It's not just this color, that color. Is how up are you going. And that's really a difficult thing, because left or right, you can't just claim it. Going up requires all your strength, and it accelerates, right? It becomes ever heavier. It makes you test your own limits. And so once you test the limits and you realize that somebody's still within those limits, because you've always been at the point in which your limits were those people's limits, you understand perfectly those limits. So the way it's terribly easy to understand, for example, a person minds, I say all the time, their political views just on the basis of their historical interests, or the way they speak, banally, the rhetoric they make. And by the way, also what you don't know, because if you root, you see, for some countries, and you project on them something that does not exist, people who know those countries know that you're not just that that's not the case, because what you're projecting is false, but also understand why you're projecting those ideas. And automatically the fact that you of course don't know anything about those countries. So it's not really flattery for people's intelligence to lie to themselves. And this is the whole sap of even of those who are obsessed about the Indo-European origins, what your alleged ancestors, and I can assure you that you have lots of non-Indo-European ancestors for that matter, so that is always, again, about you choosing that. It's not about your blood, I'm sorry. Really believed in it. What you're doing actually is just being entrenched into prefabricated notions that you use without any fact-checking, because that tells you also how much, inactive and alienated from reality not to test whether those work or not. And again, this is blaming the fourth state, the masses, etc. It's obvious. You cannot think that basically the entirety of humanity, that up to 200, 300 years ago was just illiterate, didn't know anything that happened beyond their village, or almost, or didn't need to think anything complex in scientific or theoretical terms, at this point so quickly could have turned into something functional for the world that we know. In fact, what is happening right now, you will always find also the guy that gets offended because when you claim that people are less educated than before. This is not about being less educated in absolute terms. If you think, of course, that people are more educated today than in the past. But absolute values are to what? Right? You increase your knowledge of, of 1 over 3, let's say. It's a big deal. But what is that you actually need to know to make the world work positively? Because that's the only thing that actually matters. You can know 4, 5, 6, but if you need 200 to make the world works, really claiming that people know more about history today actually doesn't even tell you how more intelligent they are. The reason why people say, the way people know more history today is that, of course, they are bombarded through the internet, the media, etc. So many cultural references or movies or video games, all this stuff that make them know, as opposed to the average kid 50 years ago, many more things in let's say in line of principle. That is to say, they know they existed and maybe have that greater depth, but how is actually their historical knowledge organized or structured or systematized in order to understand the deeper implications in the longer run? This thing is being eliminated, right? In time of, like in the 20th century, the 19th century, for example, the fourth state that had been unlocked by the, democratic reforms, voting rights, etc., was indoctrinated by a nationalistic dogma, right? It was a simple thing, properly designed at the time for people that had to be literate in a minimal way, and that would make them think the history of their own country, let's say from a given point to the present, in a way of a struggle of the people for freedom, for power, and all these things. It was a simplistic, often ridiculous, also frankly a racistic understanding of the whole thing. It was mixed with the whole culture of the time. There was, of course, racist and nationalist and all this stuff. We know that. It's not strange. It's history, right? And they had that depth. They had those idea of cultural references that were loaded in semantic archetypal values. Scientifically, it was ridiculous because nobody studies history anymore. It's just a narrative, just a story for kids, right? For kids, literally, in the sense that these were just, to be brought from schools to the battlefields of World War I or World War II. They didn't need to think that much. I mean, read Mein Kampf. What is that Hitler really said? His history, most of this theoretical stuff is useless because, after all, just there will be historians who will go on with studying that. But for the rest of the people, it's not important. It's just important that they are able to die for their fatherland. That's the entire concept of it. So today, people may know more in the sense that they have more absolute quantity of stuff in their brain, even just not historical, by the way. Think about how kids are bombarded today. They're hyperactive in a way by all the stuff they learn. It may be positive in a sense, but this stuff is not structured. It's not structured anymore. They don't learn about that in schools. They don't learn about it even it could be a cartoon plot. Kids' cartoons are getting dumber on the grounds of plots, of values, of even elementary physics, even things like manners. Archetypal values, where are they? They're all conflated, compressed. There are ideas that are frankly Chthonic and Dionysian in their sense. So just do whatever the thing you like, where there is no kind of any moral. So the idea is confusing people rather than give them a structural education. So they know history more than before, kind of, but do they actually orientate yourself in the world on that base? Really not. Because it could be that by the 20th century, countries needed to kill each other to reach hegemony, and there was no real understanding of all the cons of that, and still it was a primitive world or whatever. Today we live in a world that requires such a higher degree of complex understanding of itself that, of course, our major shortcoming, educationally speaking, is that there is not enough knowledge, there is not enough education, there are too few years of studying. Because of the general economic crisis, demographic crisis, all these things, even the need of these individuals to be more qualitatively educated is unsustainable. So people are just kind of reversing to that, if you want, in that nothingness of pre-industrial times on average, right? Just in different ways. It's a sort of new feudalism. It's not a good thing because it would be better to have a democratic reality where everybody's kind of super intelligent, super educated, so super moral, super scientific, and that is able to make things work. It would, if easily, right? Imagine everybody had a PhD experience, a serious one at least, not like in countries where you just buy doctoral titles with money and just write bullshit on that base. Talking about a structured, massive education, like everybody could study that amount of years. Of course, there would always be. Let's assume on the base of money, because money are present out there. Let's assume that there are still maybe the same amount of people who work in the same sectors, but just give them, I don't know, that experience of 3 years, right? More. Just imagine there were that capacity. I would like to check how economy would react to that. How the mere ideas would be able to change this world for the better, just overnight, if that were possible, right? And the disgusting thing, as I was saying before, is that at this point in history, we have the resources, the enormous material wealth that our grandparents, if they had seen us in our conditions, would have said, but you have all this. You have even the access to the internet. You can communicate with the entire world. This is amazing. Think of all the things you can do. Does anybody gives a shit about this today? Yes, of course, people do work with this, but their motivation is not there thinking, oh, wow, now I'm so, glad I can have all the knowledge a click away without, I don't know, having to physically move to a library or buying a book. That is what people spit blood for millennia just to be so privileged to have an education. Today, nobody gives a damn. So this is, again, yet the reason why this is going on. So people like Peterson cannot give an adequate motivation to the individual just by saying, in absolute terms, you should improve yourself, and not showing then eventually how history achieved that. All these conservative commentators come, in fact, from different backgrounds. A clinical psychologist is not a historian. I would like Peterson to study von Clausewitz, for example, and ask him what he thinks about that. I doubt, for example, he has studied Indo-European religion in depth, if he knows anything about that. And I presume that if he did, and he wanted to be vocal about that, he would be styled as a racist, as a white supremacist, even more than he's done today. Well, I mean, he's being called everything. He's being called a Jewish servant and an anti-Semite in the same ways, and he also laughs about that, rightly, and all this stuff. But that is the impression I get. We're telling kids, oh, yes, you can do it. You can do it. Just improve yourself every day. Yes, do it. And then if you don't even give them a term of comparison, that is, if you don't slap them in the face the reason why they are still the way they are, to quantify the effort that there need to be, how can you expect a person to have the capacity of measuring the magnitude of their failure? This is why thoughts like the one of Peterson, etc., do not actually go too far beyond conceptually, at least. I mean, they can be very good in the way they're laid out and very informed, etc., but they don't actually respond to the question, because if to the average failed individual, you tell him actually the scale of his failure, he would just hang himself. And this is dangerous indeed. But since people generally don't hang themselves unless they are, severely, in pain or for some reason, humans tend to have a brutal reaction and then to start make things work. I think we should really give that entire picture. And what a better one than history, right? Just, you can't do it with everything else. I mean, as you know, I think that history is a bit the history of everything. You just can't show them. You can't interest them with anything really. I think most people don't even know the world. They don't even know their own country, right? Traveling. Okay, let's but show a person, I don't know, the major differences among differences like GDP, average wage, per capita wealth, debt, deficit of the major countries in the world, and just make them reflect on that. How many people actually know this? I mean, they should be the first things any person knows about the world if they want to understand anything about that, how it works. You say, Schwerpunkt, you say you're also falling to the socio-economical bias. Well, one of the reasons why we fall in the socio-economical biases can be measured, but you should explain all this, just a starting point. You should explain why they got to that point. So not just stopping to that. How many frustrated people there are out there, if you ask on Reddit, whatever, is this country rich, is this country poor? Just look at what they answer. It's not like a economist answer. It's just people saying, this country's poor, it sucks, it's garbage, and no, mine is better, etc. That's where they stop there. because they just provide with this standard socioeconomical factors, but nobody teaches them to explain them. One of the reasons why they, of course, do this is because they don't actually know those values. They don't know how to read them. But just imagine people were versed already in this kind of thinking and mechanism and understanding the world on the ground of saying, oh wow, so my world is like this, for example. What the paranoid type fears more than else is to be discovered in his weakness. Right? Look at all these countries that are, were kind of allegedly depicted as evil because they had totalitarianism, poverty, they were, the international missions had to be sent about them. The first thing even there, search on Reddit, what do you think about these people? What do you think about this country? The first thing you find is an ethno-nationalist there that arrives with a specific aim and says, our country is perfect, there is nothing wrong, we're good people, check here and there, and makes maybe a list of links with strange stuff that is heavily ideologically oriented. Accepting the fact that there are problems in the world, and especially accepting the fact that there are problems within yourself, is the first step for any improvement. As long as you think you are just from the good side because there is something intrinsic good about you and that you're the purely persecuted martyr that the evil world rulers are plotting against, you should go to a psychiatric hospital. And then lots of things would come out, especially if you come from such countries such as, child abuse, violence against women, dramatic levels of, alcohol abuse, drug use, of course, as well, uneducation, misery. So what's wrong in these countries? Maybe you should check what's wrong in these countries. Maybe you should also understand why if a country does something and another does the same thing, still the two things are different on a moral scale. The appalling moral relativism of people saying, why there is all this coverage for Ukraine instead than from Syria or Libya? Well, because it's a bit more important for the world political situation than those countries are. Nobody is arguing that, killing is, something pleasant, but there are ways and reasons why people get killed. And especially there are ways and reasons why countries get bombed or destroyed. Like a country ruled by a dictator maybe is not exactly the type of country that you'd like really to be particularly amicable with. And we already explained why it's always the people's fault if such scumbags are in power, because actually whoever is in power is the symbol of the people. So it's not that we should hate the people, but we should understand that if you want to overthrow Saddam Hussein, for example, you can't really be blamed in the sense that, you attack a sovereign country. What the hell has to do with that? You can complain how the thing was handled, for example, but do you think that it was a negative thing to have overthrown such a regime, and that you can equate that to, now they're doing the same thing with Ukraine, you don't like it because you're a stupid Western relativist evil people, imperialist / colonialist. That tells you your poor schooling background, and in fact, that's the risk we are facing against, that these people exist also in the West. And again, they are the too much underestimated in terms of potential stupidity and damage for state masses that we have not provided to educate adequately. Also because, again, our educational institutions were mostly in Marxist hands, in a cultural sense, at least for a generation, let's say. And the objective was exactly exalting these masses in an anti-civilizational sense. How do you explain to a person who is pretending to be serious about these things if you don't enforce, 10 years of mandatory education extra compared to whatever they have been given or not given? Right, there is no way. And first of all, to mandatory education, you need force, because nobody sends, that's the thing that we have to recover. Civilization works through a degree of imposition that must be negotiated. Who does decide when you can vote, or where you can drive a car, or how many years you have to go to school? When I talk to some places here, even was a Russian friend, who incidentally escaped from Ukraine in 2014, went to live in St. Petersburg, and she didn't know. I mean, she's a girl in her 30s. She doesn't know the concept of mandatory education. I mean, that's yet another delusion. That is to say, there are people who believe in this, because what is paranoid about these attitudes so evidently is that every time you mention that civilization works through enforcement, and that the higher levels of such success are in countries that in fact are more educated, for example, they're richer and more developed, and people know more things. That their attitude is, no, this thing does not exist. This thing is fascist. I said, look, that in Russia there is mandatory education as well. Right, there's less years than other countries, but there is. I said, no, mandatory education, like in the way you described it, is, parents go to jail if children are not sent to school, or at least they're taken, away the custody of their children. It's something that mandatory education involves to ensure it in the first place. Well, this person in their 30s had never heard of the concept. So just imagine to live in a modern reality, and with your mind as a supposedly adult, mature being, you have never heard of the concept of compulsory mandatory education. And then you wonder why, you can, in such country, have 70% of the people that do not even, it's not that they don't know what is going on in Ukraine, but that they don't, like, when exposed with the evidence, they're not capable of distinguishing it from what is actually going on. Well, again, the average Western moral relativist would be the same idiot who says, no, this is all Western propaganda. We know what the Russians tell other. Maybe they're right. So it means that you also don't know what's... By the way, the public data also put out by Russia itself about how information is controlled there and how it is here. And the fact that you, as a Westerner, do not know it is not, again, a good sign. Again, it's a problem of the West. It's not just your problem, but it's both. And still, you are a Westerner, even if you don't realize it because you're too dumb, because you are able to pose yourself this question, whereas another person elsewhere doesn't even get to ask himself this question. That means what is to be a Westerner. And if you're still rooting for something that is not this, in other words, you just want to be ruled by a dictator without any personal, any civil right, or, just your idea of, which sounds also suspiciously, suspicious on the grounds of who you like to be dominated by in many ways, where you can't do anything but, you're poor, you're less educated, you have a shitty life in comparison to the one you have here, while you keep whining. For what? Like, at least, ethno-nationalists in the 20th century didn't self-sabotage their own country, right? It's true also. Many people in these other countries here that we have illustrated do not self-sabotage themselves, because they are indoctrinated into thinking that whatever their country does is good, and they shouldn't even think otherwise, or at least, it's better for them to believe that, because otherwise for them it would be a tragedy. It's not Russians actually don't understand or do not recognize things that are happening. It's just that they're by default trained to be distrustful of anybody, which is convenient enough for them to still, be wary of things, but still for the government not to, to be sure that they stop themselves to that attitude. They do not ask more, because if you make the morally relativistic point that everybody is to distrust, of course also the Western distrust. How many times talking with them they told you, politicians are all corrupt. They completely lack the idea that there is a difference between even assuming that all politicians were corrupted by, I don't know, the degree of corruption, or between a country and another. No, it's important to be completely fearful, paranoid, distrustful, concentrated in their reality, full of hatred and resentment towards whoever tries to challenge their view, this is what the Soviets trained them to do. It's not that all Russians do that. You can't have a normal conversation with a Russian, but at a certain point, at least from a Western standpoint, you realize that there is a divide that is evident. Because if you talk to 1,000 of them, as I can have done in my life, and you hear the same words, the same ideas, the same limits, and they shut down every time. You can't even have a dialogue to the point where you hint that there may be something strange going on, and they maybe listen to you, but they immediately understand that they get tense because they're scared. Well, that's not exactly my idea of a healthy situation, civilizationally speaking. And so what are you as Westerners whining about your West? It's your fault if the left has had all this space in our culture. It's your fault because you have let it happen. But the rest is not better. The rest of the world is not better. You shouldn't self-sabotage your own country because just there are things that suck in yours. So you can pass the ball to somebody who's going to smash it in your face. Because that's exactly what you're doing right now. And it's pathetic. Right? The alleged ancestors that you, again, as a fourth stater, do not understand were radically aristocratic and superior individually in nature, would have actually thought of you is that you are basically a slave to crush. That's the greatest certainty that we have about what those peoples would think about you. Because all we know about their moral system tells us that that is the case. So, in other words, I could go on, but I think you got the point. I think you get that without history, without the styling of a radical consequence and the lack of compromises on the most important principles, you can't quite go anywhere. I could finish by just saying that the lack of faith, in the sense of not of fatalism, but the lack of faith in the sense of faith necessary to take a leap forward with a calculated risk and a motivation for it, is the fate that we need. What we're witnessing in our culture is just, we didn't think this would happen, so we don't know what to do. That's a form of moral weakness. And this has been going on for too long. It's a great crisis in the West, but it's actually a great, it's not near as disastrous as the moral situation of the rest of the world. Right? Even our allies, I don't know, ask a Japanese what a swastika is. I mean, they fought alongside the Nazis. They don't know. How can you think they know? I remember it was a Japanese girl once. I told her that I could change university if I wanted to. This person, it's not that she said, oh, here it's different, so I understand you can do it there now. No, she couldn't even think that the possibility existed in the realm of reality. This is not a Western thinking. That's something else, and I thank God for being a Westerner in this sense. That you understand why I need, because I know that I can rely on the concept of superiority of this thinking. Because I don't care what is Westerner or Martian or whatever. I care for it because it works. Because it gives us the confidence to, yes, take a ship and colonize the world, and maybe doing also a bunch of horrible stuff in the meanwhile, but still doing far better than any other culture has ever done historically, given that the rest that we're doing was just killing, enslaving, and raping each other from morning to evening, or even beyond for that matter. And so I personally think that civilization improves in the world, and it seems to me that right now it's not really improving, because the quality is collapsing. So civilization goes back and forth in history. It's a non-linear progress, and the only thing that makes it go further is people. It's not weird socioeconomical indicators. Again, we are complaining about the fact that the prospects of growth are going down. This is a problem. Yes, this is a problem, but do you want to compare it to, what happened for millennia of people, having their harvests destroyed? by an army or a garrison literally starving to death as a regular possibility that could happen multiple times in a lifetime, those people lived on and brought us to what we are now. And what we have now, we complain. Do you see yourself in the near future, even if with Russian grain exports blocked and Ukraine devastated, and the price of bread or pasta or whatever going higher? Do you think that is such a dramatic issue? Of course, as I was saying before, this will trigger other issues, but these issues largely depend on how you personally react as an individual. Again, your grandparent would have joked about this while was under the bombs, as much as Ukrainians are joking right now about the disgusting slobs that have become now, not even be able to defend them properly. Right, so I think that people need to reassess a bit, the value of their existence. That would be a very important thing, and stopping to flatter themselves into thinking that they're special just because they breathe, because nobody cares. And that's what you have to learn. The first thing you have to learn if you want to live in this world. That taking things for granted is for weak people, and nobody needs weak people in this world. Nobody likes them. Nobody wishes to have children with them. Nobody wishes to spend time with them. Nobody cares about them. Nobody will be around their deathbed when they die. And it's good like this, because we need strong people. The weak ones we can leave behind. And the point is that every weak person can become a strong person. And that's the difference that makes properly being weak or being strong, recognizing that. So we will keep talking about this stuff at some point. I take this video as in part as a vent, because I can tell you that the last weeks were quite, I'm one of those who looks at every single detail on the map of Ukraine and all the news and all these things. I check in detail all the time. And I don't know, we went pretty close to nuclear disaster, right? In Europe, could basically wipe each other out, or even just an accident in Ukraine could bring to a domino effect that we have no idea of. It could, little things that probably, it's not just a matter of you living in, more distant than a couple of 100 kilometers from, would die in a short time. No, it's nothing, That's what it seems that, people are just, relaxing, have learned to relax too much, not understanding what is at stake here. And I even kept a diary of the invasion. Then I realized how, inconsistent any of this offensive is, in a sense that nobody believed that it could be just so. I don't know. I hardly can find an adjective to describe the failure of the Russian invasion. It's something appalling, and unfortunately, it's not over. In the sense that they have lost the war easily. It's just that it depends how much that they're going to destroy in the meanwhile. That matters. It's just that it's too painful to ward, and reason for which I will just stop it here without the usual conclusion. I just hope that you are realizing, because I must confess that these were all ideas that I already nurtured from quite a while, right? And I improved them, let's say, with studying things that you may be unaware how deeply they are related. even to properly history, the Clausewitzian theory, I mean, everything that we cover in here, and that seem to have become ever more connected to what seems instead to be the main cultural goals of main cultural interests of these times, right, in popular culture worldwide, especially in the West. And there is so much to dig into this, because I fear that the worst was beyond what we could imagine, right? I must say myself, I've been taken by surprise, not much by like up to a few, I remember from this summer from Afghanistan, I said now Russia will do something. I was caught by surprise up to at least the last days, the last weeks before the invasion, of the Russian invasion itself, because it's just so politically and strategically literate that nobody could believe that this thing could be done, and it's that's another thing. But I had pretty clear in mind this situation was of extreme weakness and fragility. It's not just for the West. This is really for everybody, right? And that's also why we need to be strong from our standpoint now, because what we make now makes the difference in practice, and we can make it. Like we can win this, right? On the shorter, medium, or longer run, this thing can and will be won. I'm sure that the Russian failure was catastrophic, was colossal. It's incredible, and that's where you need to be also scared, because as when such things happen, things can become even more unstable, and that's in fact a risk that we're going to face. But it's a matter of how strong you can maintain, which is not the the certainty of victory in absolute terms, but it's the only way it can be done. And I think really that the majority of moral forces stand from the right side, right? So this video probably will cause a lot of turmoil. No, I don't think so, really, because most of those who had to, some recriminations are out. But I think that it's important to speak about it, and I have just begun, meaning that there are lots of implications to this that I haven't addressed in this video, but that we will look in detail hopefully at some point. And I hope to make also a bit more of videos like this, because at this point have become necessary, right? At this point we need to acknowledge that there have been some changes in the world that are really massive, and that will have to bring to a complete rebalance of lots of stuff that we have given for granted, by the way. For I think my lifetime is exemplificative in times of the moment probably of the, if not the glory, the triumph of the West, but at least the moment in which we thought things were over, right, in some ways. And it was a mistake. I never believed that, by the way, but many people believed that, and at least the way we relied on this is weakened us, right? So, but it's not the end that I can tell. In our, it depends on what happens within us, right? It's not what happened outside of us. Outside of us, the worst can happen, but what happens within us is what makes the difference. All right. So for today, I quit it here. I hope that you're fine, and a thought to the people of Ukraine and whoever is fighting for them in Russia as well, with the protests and the general disillusion that, believe me, many Russians now are beginning to properly to taste in all its bitterness and in all its reality, right? Because reality can never be escaped, even how doesn't matter how hard you try to ignore it. And now we'll see. But I quit it here. See you next time.